All right, we are ready for the next section in our EasyBuilder workshop series. So if you're new to this section or have just joined the workshop midway, if you have not done the introductory section, I would highly encourage you to do that. You can find it on our YouTube channel. We're going to be moving on though with lab exercise 5, where we're going to be talking about electronic thresholds or electronic filters. So pulling up my Insight software again. From the last exercise we did, we are already in the correct version of the camera. So we are using, if you go under the Get Connected tab, the model number 7600. This is a 640 by 480 resolution camera. So all we need to do in this particular example is to be able to load in the correct series of images. Now, if you have not done the other parts of this series, or are you new to the workshop and have just walked in, the way that we loaded this camera in is using the emulator and then choosing it from our selection list. If you need help getting to that, please refer back to the earlier videos of this series where we go over the emulator in depth. All right. So in order to load in our new set of images, we need to do a couple things. One is we go back under the Get Connected. Down here at the bottom, we're going to choose the option New Job. Do you want to clear the data? I'm going to say yes. So we get rid of all that data from that job. I'm then going to go under Setup Image. Lower left-hand corner, Load Images from the PC. Under my Playback tab on the right-hand side, I have this selection button with the 3 periods that I'm going to choose. And the set of images that we're going to work with in this is going to be the images called tablets. And I'm going to say OK and OK. And you'll notice here we have a series of some sort of medication in a foil backed container with a clear plastic cover. Now this is using a bright field light of some sort. I can tell that because I can see the surface of my part. I can also tell it's bright field though because I'm getting glare in a variety of areas. So I'm getting a lot of glare in the corners of some of these packs where it looks like they'd be bent towards me a little bit. So we're not completely flat. So I'm getting glare in areas that are very similar to the color of my pills. This is going to be a little bit of a challenge because we need to count to make sure that we have 24 tablets here amongst these 3 packs. So what we're going to do, if you've already sat through several of the other videos we have in this series, we would set up a more complete job. We're going to be dealing in the next several lab examples of just what we need to do to solve this particular problem on how the tool itself works. And specifically on this one, we're going to be working with Blob tool settings and electronic filters. So what we're going to do is go straight to Inspect Part. And from here, under our tool list in the lower left-hand corner, I'm going to go under Counting Tools. And I'm going to choose the Blobs tool and say Add. So this puts me a pink box on the screen. This is where I'm going to be looking for my blobs at. But I want to look at the entire screen. And I could sit here and try to drag this out and get it, all the way to the edge. But I've got a shortcut tool that can help me. Up here on the toolbar, there is what looks like almost a 4-legged spider. And if you hover over it, it says Maximize Region. If I choose it, it automatically scales my box to the outside edge of my image. So now I've got the full screen. All right, so with that, I can now going to set OK and set the tool in place. And you'll notice up here, I am counting nothing. It doesn't see a blob at all. If you've already been through the example with us working with blobs on the T-bar analysis, that one we found blobs instantly as soon as we put the tool down. In this case, it's not working for us. We're not counting anything. Well, why is that? If we look at the results coming out of our tool down here on our histogram, the histogram graph shows me all of the pixels by number of a particular color that's in my image. So if you notice, I have a spike out here towards the 255 line. So that spike going to be the white pixels because 255 is white on the grayscale. There's also a nice spike here in the darker gray areas. That's going to be my actual gray material of the aluminum background behind these pills. And then if you look, there's also another spike right here, right at 0. That spike is going to be these black pixels that make up the background between my packs. Now, between all of this, there's a whole lot of other pixels of all sorts of different colors on the grayscale. That's going to be all these different reflective areas and textures and shadows that are actually part of this texturized aluminum backing that we have on the back side of this pill pack. That's what's really confusing us, because a blob is a group of pixels that are the same color that are touching. Well, there's so many different colors and so many different variations that we really can't discern the blobs that we want to discern with it. So we need to be able to sort that out. So one way we can do that is if I go under the settings for the tool, I can take this out of automatic mode into manual mode for my threshold to be able to adjust the threshold of this. I can also say, instead of looking for either color, I want to look for only the white blobs. And now I can start moving this threshold, which right now is sitting mid-scale. I want to get closer out here to where this spike is. That's probably the top of my pills. So I'm just going to start raising this up. Ooh, and as I hit my up arrow, I got into the low 200s, and all of a sudden I had a huge group of blobs just pop out to me. So with these blobs, I can now start seeing the top of the pills, but you'll also notice I'm also picking up a lot of the glared areas. So I'm just going to keep raising this threshold higher and higher until I'm only getting the tops of the pills. All right, so 247 is where that is. So a blob threshold of 247, I get just the tops of the pills, and I've gotten rid of all the other glare. Well, a couple things with this. Our scale is 0 to 255. So at 247, our threshold is now almost to the very end of what we have the ability to make a decision with. It's generally not good practice to run any tool right at the edge of where you have a decision line at. It's better to get more mid-scale. The other thing that's happening is the blobs we're finding on the tops of these pills are so small, we're really not capturing the entire pill to say that we have the entire part there. So one way we can deal with this is if I lower my threshold, I now start to pick up some of the glared areas. What we learned from our previous example with our T-bar, I can play with the sizes. So if I run up the minimum size, I can run down my threshold and run up my minimum size and run down my threshold. So I can play these two numbers off of each other, but you notice, although the tops of my blobs on the pills are getting larger, they're not getting larger drastically. And I can keep playing these tools off of each other to get as big as I can. But I'm not going to get much past probably 230, 225 and still be able to get just the pills without any of the glare background. And I'd like to be a little farther away from the edge of this. So what we're able to do is to employ an electronic filter with this. So what I'm going to do is, under the inspect part, I'm going to collapse my counting tool section. Now I'm going to open up my image filter tools. Now I'm going to choose a filter and hit add. And I'm going to use that same, or I'm going to use this same, almost the whole part image. I'm going to make it just a little smaller than the full image so that I can be able to work with this now. As soon as I get it in place, I'm going to hit OK. And you'll notice, and this is the reason I didn't make it full image, this is what's happening to a blob tool. This first filter that automatically puts down is known as a binarized filter. A blob tool is a binarized object. So it's instantly converting all of the pixels to either pure black or pure white based off that threshold we were just moving. So as I look at the settings of this, if I were to change this threshold mode from automatic to manual, remember our decision line at 247, if I type that in, that's what that blob tool was actually seeing that we were using just a moment ago. We got down to about 230. This is what it would look like. So as it was looking for blobs, you notice these areas are growing in size along with the tops of the pills, but they're looking very similar to the number of white pixels that we have between the pills and the background. If I move this over, you can see this is my original image, this is my filtered image. So I wanted you to be able to see what the difference in those were. So I'm going to make this now use my maximize region button and take this full screen. So now I'm processing the entire screen with my filter. So I wanted to show you this so that you understood how the blob tool was thinking about the data, but this really doesn't help us any. Now, if I come under filter type, there's actually a long list of filter types that we could potentially use. Binarize is a very common filter, and if you'd like to know more details about the others, the help file from Cognex is very extensive. It can take you through it in detail, but for the sake of time today, there's really only two other filters I want to be able to point out to you. One is known as the dilate filter. Now, the dilate filter will take the pixels and will turn them lighter based off the data of the pixels around them. So if I see here kernel rows and columns, as I increase these, notice I'm getting a little lighter and a little lighter. So I'm going to put this on 7 and 7. You notice my background and my pills are almost blending into each other. It's taking the data and the pixels around it, bringing it in to help make the decision of what the pixels should become. Now, the kernels and rows, this filter only works when they're on an odd number. If I change one of these to an even number, the filter does not behave properly. So it does have to be an odd number for it to behave. Now, in our particular case here, we want to isolate the white pills from the background. It doesn't help us to have a white background and white pills. We want it to be the opposite. So the filter that works in the opposite of that is the erode filter. So I'm going to come down and choose erode, and you'll notice I now have a background, and I'm going to take this up to 9 by 9, that is filling in. It's becoming darker and darker. All the tops of my pills become more rounded. So I have a better definition of a lighter colored area against a black background. This should enable us to be able to have our blob tool work better. So let's take a look at the settings for the blob tool. So if I highlight blob, notice my image goes back to my original acquired image. I haven't pointed this blob tool yet to my filtered image. So what I need to do is go into the General tab of the Blob tool, and I'm going to change this tool image from the acquisition image to the filtered image. Now I'm working off that filtered image. Now I can go back into my settings, and now I can start lowering my threshold. And you'll notice now I can get down really, really much more towards the mid-range. Right now I'm going to stop here at 161. And you'll notice I pretty much have the complete top of every pill that's there without getting any of the glare, because I use my filter tool to fill in the glare. And now my blob tool, I can get to the mid-range of the scale. By having it the mid-range of the scale, I can get a much more consistent, a much more regular, and a much more reliable decision coming out of it. So that's the basics of how I can use electronic filters to be able to help my data out. Now, you'll notice my tool is still red, although I'm counting 24. That's because of my range. Remember, we count whatever we first put the tool down, and when we first put the tool down, we didn't count anything. They were at 0. So now if I reset my limits, I'm now green in passing. So now as I look through my sample image, if I play next, oh, we picked up a little bit of glare here. So I need to go back under my settings. Let's raise that just a little. So I can do a combination of that and maybe my size, since my pills are much larger now, and I can get rid of that glare. Next image in, no problem, no problem. Counting 16, my blob tool is red. It has failed because it's outside of the range. 16 outside of the range. Same thing there. And now I've got 24 again. So my job is behaving the way that I need it to. So that's the basics for electronic filters and a counting blob tool. So that really completes where we're at with exercise 5. We're actually going to go right into, without stopping, into exercise 6. We're going to start talking about edges and edge counting. Now, this actually becomes a very important concept, the way that edge tools are able to behave. So I'm going to come back over to my Insight software. I'm going to come back under Get Connected. I'm going to hit New Job because I want to clear the data out from this past one. I'm going to come under Setup Image. I'm going to load the image from the PC. I'm going to choose my selection button to point to the file I want. And in this case, I'm going to scroll down my list until I choose the folder Edges and say OK. Now, this isn't actually a physical part. This is an exercise to get across the concept of how an edge tool behaves before we look at a live part. So with that being said, I'm going to come straight to Inspect Part. I'm going to come under Presence and Absence, and I'm going to choose Edge because I want to look for an edge. And I'm going to say Add. Now in this case, it puts me a line on the screen. So I'm just going to put it next to one of my edges and hit OK. And you notice it now gives me a box I can work with. And it has already found the edge. Now I'm going to take this box and I'm going to expand it across all of my edges that I have here. So you notice it's now put my edge on the right side of this black bar. The main concept of this exercise is to understand why that line is on the right side of that particular black bar. Why isn't it on the left side of the second gray bar or the right side of the first black bar? Well, that's what we're going to get into, is to be able to get the differences in how that behaved. One of the most important concepts to understand that is going to be this guy right here above my cursor. That arrow indicates the direction that the tool is working in. So if you notice right now, this tool is working going from left to right. Down here at the bottom, this little swirly icon, if I choose it, I could spin the tool around, and now my tool is working from right to left. That's the direction the arrow is pointing. If I turn it this way, it would be going bottom to top. So the arrow becomes the reference of our decision. That becomes the ruler that we're going to use to determine how our settings are behaving. So please remember that that arrow does represent the point of origin, where we're starting from on how the tool behaves. The other thing we have going on is, if I look here in my graph, you notice I have a series of peaks, and I have a couple of short peaks. I have a series of tall ones, and then another couple of short ones. These peaks relate to the bars that we have on the screen. So these shorter peaks are actually the first gray and the second gray bar. The black bars are the taller ones. These are showing the difference in contrast. Contrast is the difference in color from the part to the background in this case. The bigger the contrast, the higher the spike. So we're going to use that to our favor on how we choose what we want to select. So if I go under Settings, you'll notice here I'm looking for a minimum contrast change of 25 on the grayscale, and I'm looking for the edge transition labeled both. Well, let's look at that one first. If I look at both, I can choose dark to light, light to dark, or both. So if I choose dark to light, notice my line doesn't move. I'm already, look where I'm going from left to right. This is a dark to light transition. And that transition happens to be the best score contrast-wise between the black area and the white background. This is just a little darker than the other lines. If I change my score from best score to first edge, now I get the first dark to light transition going from left to right. If I change this instead of dark to light, light to dark, now I get the left side. That is the first light to dark transition from the point of origin going left to right. If I change this to last edge, this is the last light to dark transition, not the last edge of the series, but the last one that's transitioning from a light area to a dark area. The last edge of the series is a dark to light transition. So all of these are referencing from that point of origin. That left to right is how you have to think about these definitions of light to dark, dark to light, and first edge, last edge. Now let's say, for example, I wanted to ignore these gray bars and I wanted to pick up only the black bars. That's where I have to look at the contrast difference, and I actually have to pay closer attention to these graphs here. So I want to raise, you notice here my decision lines, these horizontal lines are set at 25, same number as my contrast number. As I raise this up or down, you'll see those lines change as I change my setting until the point where I'm above all of my small peaks. These are now no longer being considered because their contrast difference is too low to cross my decision line. So now I'm getting the last edge of a dark to light transition, the right side of my black bar. If I get the first edge of a dark to light transition, it's the right side of the first bar. If I change light to dark, this is the first edge of a light to dark transition, or the last edge of a light to dark transition. So the transitions of these edges, understanding how they work, and the reason why this exercise is done with just some very rudimentary lines is to really get across the concept that we're going to be working with the point of origin and the direction the tool is processing it. All right. If there are questions, please throw them up into the chat area. Be happy to take a look and answer those right quick. I'm not seeing anything come in right now. All right. That really completes the electronic filters and the edge exercise. So we're going to be closing this section out and getting ready to move on